Somebody call a doctor.
I want a bigger logo. You can't handle a bigger logo.
G'day, this is the Dr. Branding Podcast. I'm your branding doctor, Frank. The surgery is open and let's answer our next patient's question. Okay, this comes from Shane in the USA. Okay, doc, I have a problem, all right? For the most part of my branding and design projects, I keep using the same fonts. And by fonts, I mean it's pretty much all Montserrat. Help me, doc, cries in Montserrat Bold. Shane, thank you for the question. I'm going to treat this serious. Let's get serious here because I think this is a problem that many designers can fall into, this rut at one time or another of using the same fonts or typefaces, if you will. So, all right, I'm just going to say it. I think you have a case of, or what you would call a Montserrut, yeah? Or in other words, you're in a rut of using Montserrat or whatever the font or typeface it is that you keep using is where we're at. We're in that rut, yeah? That free Google font likely typeface that is seemingly, and it might not be a reality, but it might seem like you continuously choose it because, hell, it's a good choice. You know, it's easy to use. You find yourself using it again and again because why? It's so versatile. It can work in many different contexts. And you likely find this rhythm of, you know, working quicker at what it is you do, and you fall back on these fonts and typefaces that really work for you and your style. Because searching for fonts in itself, it could be a full-time job, you know. It's something that it does take time. It is a big part of a branding process or any other kind of design project that you might not have a set branded font to use. But to do better branding, we want to make sure that we've got the right typefaces, fonts, typography, all working together to really deliver a great message and really fit, the personality of the brand and the way it wants to communicate. If it can give some kind of feeling in those fonts, especially for things like obviously headings rather than body copy. But you you fall back on what works. We've all fallen into this rut, into this bit of a trap, I guess you could call it, this condition of Montserrat. Look, when you look at something like, let's take Montserrat, for example. It is very versatile. It has many weights, so many different fonts in its typeface. It's legible to read at smaller sizes, so it works in those contexts where it can be as versatile for web, for print, for social media content, all these things. And anything in between, you know, there's many other fonts like Montserrat. I'm not just going to focus on Montserrat for this one, even though Shane's crying in Montserrat Bold. Is other fonts. You've got Poppins, DM Sans, Merriweather, Laura, Lato, Roboto, Railway. Railway's another one. And Open Sans. You know, these are the very popular Google font typefaces that you will see on the homepage of Google Fonts. If you haven't ever gone there before, it's fonts.google.com. I think that's the web address. These are great go-to choices and very much fallback choices, even in my own brand projects that I do to help my clients. But the overarching problem in this diagnosis and this condition of Montserrat is that, look, clients are going to have a limited budget to work with in some cases. If you're working with smaller brands, smaller businesses, they've outlaid their spend on you to help them with the branding, and then they've obviously got to market that as well after the fact and maybe apply it to packaging, put it on their signage of their building. So there's a lot of costs going on, and to add not insult to injury, it's nothing like that. It's just that extra cost might be just the extra hidden cost that they're not wanting to invest in when there are other alternative options out there that can be free for commercial use, like Google Fonts. Now, we don't want to go to dafont.com and take fonts from there. Not a good option, especially for usability across multiple different scenarios, especially on websites. You might run into problems, or your client might run into problems using those typeface font files potentially. And then even licensing, you might not have an appropriate license for commercial use using something like Dafont fonts that you find on there. But there's other foundries out there than Google that you could be finding fonts, and trying to find fonts, if cost is a prohibitive factor in this case, then it's trying to find maybe those typefaces or fonts that aren't a huge investment. If it's $20, Australian, US dollars, pounds, whatever it might be. In this case, Shane's in the USA, so US dollars. For $20 US, that's not a huge hit to the pocket, hit to the hip pocket, should I say. So, finding maybe a potentially reliable font in that case, again, does take time. And there are different foundries that you can find pretty reasonable fonts, display fonts, and typefaces. But again, that takes time. The other factor to this is this prohibitiveness of spending the time to find it when you've got these holy grail fonts to work with, where you're like, if I just lent into them and then didn't worry too much and focused on more important things potentially in this brand, that would probably be a better use of everyone's time and getting the deliverable out there as quick as possible, efficiently, with a good result still, because these are going to work. But then the third part to this is that your design style might lend itself to these particular fonts or typefaces. I'm going to keep saying fonts and typefaces. We all know the difference as designers. If you aren't across the idea of what a typeface is versus what a font is, a typeface is just a family of fonts. So we've got, say, Montserrat will have regular, it'll have bold, and then all these other different weights in between. Whereas a font is just Montserrat Bold, like Shane is crying in. So your design style might lend itself to using specific fonts like this. So let's say you work with tech businesses, and the bit of the trend at the moment in tech startups is this idea of what's called blanding, and even fashion is going down this path in the last few years, where it's very much these sans serif font usage in, say, the word mark of a logo. And a sans serif, again, if you're listening to this or watching this and you're not across these terms, a sans serif and a serif font is very much, a serif font would be something like Times New Roman that you might be aware of, has all these little fancy little, if you'd call them ligatures, or just little swishy bits at the end of all the little letter forms. Sorry, I'm falling on my words here. Whereas a sans serif font doesn't have those. It's much cleaner edges, all the things. And Montserrat Bold, or Montserrat in general, is a sans serif font. So if you're working with, a tech business or maybe a fashion business, and they want to move down this more modern, digital first route, sans serif fonts like a Montserrat can be very much applicable. And your style, if you're attracting those same clients, looking for the same output that you have done for previous clients, then it might be just a perpetual thing where you keep using the same fonts in this case. It works. It works for this industry. And by all means, those clients that you work with probably aren't going to be competing in the same market, or at least even maybe the industry specifically, or the actual service or product that they offer. But your style might over time develop into that kind of look, and that's what people come to you for. And that can be a bit of a rut. You might see it that way. You might not. That's okay if you see it whichever way. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. But I guess in the case of, say, Shane's condition here of Montserrat, is that there's an inclination to move away from it. So what do we do? Because it can be a problem. You might feel like it is a problem, and a client might say, "Oh, do you only just use these kinds of fonts because that's what I can see throughout your whole thing?" And you could just turn around and say, "Well, this is my style. this is what you might come to me for. Happy to explore different options. And obviously we're going to try and tailor it to your business and what your brand can really stand for. So by all means, we can do something very different. But it comes back to what you're trying to communicate, what you're trying to maybe emulate in terms of a look that you feel aligned with. And that might be that. But let's say we want to cure Montserrat. So I'm going to give you this prescription, because you might end up finding that this portfolio of yours just starts to look too same, and you want to stand out a little bit and not be just known for the Montserrat Bold. So here's what I'd recommend you do. If you're finding fonts, typefaces, separate them into two different columns. Yeah. So the first column being the font or the typeface that you're going to use, well, let's say the font rather than the typeface, for the logo. Okay. So with a logo, we generally have a word mark with it that says the name of the business, unless you're something like Apple or MasterCard or Mercedes that no longer have that. Most likely you're going to have the word or the words that form the name of the business brand or the product brand. For that particular font, you could be, before I get into that, the second one is your body copy fonts. So we've got logo fonts and then we've got body copy fonts. The fonts that are used for all the different type treatments that could be used in your website, it could be used in advertising, your promotion, your organic content on social media, all the things. Yeah. So there's the two things, logo font and body copy fonts. Where I was going before, the logo font for a word mark. Now this could be a display font, what you call a display font. So it's a font that doesn't have any other fonts related to it. It's not a typeface. It's just one particular font that was just custom made, has a bit of a style to it potentially, and might align well with your client's brand. Has some swishy look to it, has a very custom boutique kind of look. But what you might also do if it's not a display font, or if it is, or you've used a font from a certain typeface, is that we could customize it. You're a designer, you've got Adobe Illustrator or Procreate. You could customize a font that you use as a base and then use the pencil tool or pen tool, or whichever tool it is that you want, the actual pencil itself on your iPad, and you customize it to its nth degree. So that doesn't look like the original font potentially, or it could just have a slight variation to it. You could change up the tracking a bit, the leading if it's multiple lines of a word mark, so multiple words that form the brand name. That's one way you could do it. Otherwise, you could find those display fonts and just use them as part of a word mark in conjunction with an icon, so a logo mark, let's say. And you find these particular fonts, could be from Google Fonts, but you could source them from Envato or Envato Elements. Creative Market, Design Cuts is another one. You Work for Them, if you do a Google search for You Work for Them, they have a great foundry of fonts that are at typically pretty reasonable prices. Same with Envato and Creative Market. Then you've got Adobe Fonts as well, where the problem though with Adobe Fonts is that you do need to have the license of the subscription to Adobe Fonts to be able to use those particular fonts. But say if you did use them to begin with, you do have an Adobe Creative Cloud account and you use it as a base and you do customize it into a custom word mark that does not look like the original font. It's now an outline shape that your client can then go and register for trademarking potentially. That's a good way of doing it. The same with Google Fonts as well. You could just keep it as the font itself and go, yep, that's the font we want to use, and that's kind of it. The more emphasis is on the logo mark, the icon, the symbol, whatever it might be, or the full kind of mark where there's type that works into it, like a badge, like a symbol, like a Harley Davidson kind of logo. But if you're going to use any of these kind of display fonts or any font or typefaces, just making sure that you have the appropriate license to use it if it's not going to be altered. Same thing goes for your client, just having that on hand, especially if it's something that you then even use into the body copy. So you might use the same font for the word mark, And then you want to have that consistency into the rest of the visual identity, where all the body copy for the typography of the brand is using the same typeface. That creates some nice synergy, nice harmonious brand. But we want to be able to try and make this an ownable asset, though. I think, customize the font is a better way to go, I believe, in terms of creating a better brand for your clients to own and roll with for ever and a day. But you see, many different big brands that are based on specific fonts, be it Gotham with the Spotify logo, things like that. It's just a case of licensing if you use it as is. But this is going to add personality to your brand, especially if you do customize. We want to kind of inject some personality. It's not a prerequisite by any stretch of the imagination to have communication of what it is you do or the kind of tone and feel of the brand baked into the typeface or the font, the display font, or the custom font treatment that you make. It's not a prerequisite. It's not a be-all and end-all. There are 3 other considerations that come before it: identification, memorability, and then usability. Then comes communication to really sell the kind of personality. So this is where Montserrat will become a problem. This Montserrat, whereas if you're not using it as a custom type treatment, so say you start with Montserrat Bold and you're not customizing it, this is where you might fall into that rut where you're just using Montserrat Bold as is, leaving it that, job done, move on to the next one, and all the word marks that you're doing for clients are using the same font, and it just looks a bit same potentially. But again, that might become your style. That's what you can become known for. It might not be a bad thing. You might not really be in a Montserrat. Now, the body copy fonts. The flip side of this is that this is using, say, Montserrat is less of a problem, because I think it really comes down to, it looking great, it being usable, versatile, all the things is probably not a bad thing. Go for it. Use Montserrat, or if it's DM Sans, Open Sans, Merriweather, whatever it is, use them constantly. For those use cases. If you find that you can get your type treatment working well with them, fantastic. You could even mix it up between having a sans serif font like Montserrat and then go for a serif font as well in a combo together that go together like peas and carrots, if you get that Forrest Gump reference. But I think using this font or whatever it is, and you just can't shake it like that 2-month cough that you have during winter, I don't think this is, again, I'm going to keep saying this, I don't think it's a huge deal. But maybe instead you have a team, okay? So you have a team of typefaces that you use interchangeably like a bench. They come off the bench, it's game time, now it's Montserrat's turn. On the bench, you've still got Railway, you've got DM Sans, you've got Open Sans, all the good lineup, the dream team of Google fonts that you can use at your disposal for the next project and the next project and the next project. This time for this game, for this client, it's going to be Montserrat. Next time, we're not going to use Montserrat. We're going to change it up. Yeah. This is what you could do to approach it in terms of those body copy fonts, because you know that they're probably going to be versatile enough to fit different types of brands, especially if they're in the same kind of industry, let's say, or across many different industries. And you want something that's legible, that's versatile, usable in many different contexts. You've got the dream team bench sitting right there. There's a lot of analogies going on here. But it might not come down to the font choice. It could be all about how you use it, okay? Typographically speaking. Be it size, not that that's everything, but also color, leading, tracking, the background color that it's on or the texture it's on potentially. All the things that give this body copy, the typography, a different feel that can be distinct to your client's brand is what we're really trying to achieve here. So you've got the word mark sorted, you've got the body copy sorted, every other visual element around it, be it your symbol, be it patterns, textures, other symbols and icons, suggested imagery, a mascot potentially, and then a whole suite of mock-ups to really sell it in context to show how all these elements, especially type, work in the real world, how that could be used as a bit of a guide to say, hey, when you make your social media posts, this is how we want to lay out our text in terms of the hierarchy. These are the fonts we're using. These are the colors we're using. These are the images and background elements that you can use. Go at it. So this is what we want to do. This is how we can overcome Montserrat. And look, Shane, I really do. Apart from the question, it was very funny. Thank you for asking it and submitting it for the Dr. Branding podcast. But look, thank you again for your question. And for those of you listening, I do hope that will help you too. Those of you designers out there, please take a piece of brand candy, my free resource guide to do better branding that you can get on your way out at g'dayfrank.com/candy. You can also make an appointment like Shane via that link if you have a brand related ailment that you'd like help with. And I'll see you at the next appointment in my next episode. Bye everyone. Thanks for listening. The surgery is now closed. The Dr. Branding podcast is hosted by Reagan Frank McCrill, that's me, and for legal reasons I want to be clear that I am not a registered or qualified doctor. The premise for this podcast is that it is a satirical analogy for branding consultancy to help others with their brand success. This podcast is also sponsored by my branding business G'day Frank. Say G'day today by booking a call with me at g'dayfrank.com.